Coming up on Mountain News at 5:30, the man charged with assault after a shooting which led to several schools going on lockdown was in court virtually today. And an appeals court blocks Texas from enforcing a bill which would give law enforcement the power to jail and prosecute migrants suspected of crossing the border without authorization.
Plus, we are not done with the freezing weather just yet. Your forecast on the way as Mountain News at 5:30 starts now.
Dedicated to Southern and Eastern Kentucky, this is WYMT Mountain News at 5:30.
Good evening, I'm Steve Hensley. A man charged after a shooting that led to a manhunt and several schools going on lockdown appeared virtually in court this morning. Pedro Teresa was charged with assault after the incident. WYMT's Chandler Wilcox tells us what new information we learned today.
Kentucky State Police Detective Ethan Crouch testified in court with new information about the March 8th shooting involving Pedro Teresa. Crouch said the shooting happened early that day after an argument about a side-by-side.
Through speaking with the witnesses and the victim himself, they advised that Pedro Teresa came to the residence early that morning.
He said one man identified as Roger Pelfrey was shot twice. Crouch said they located Teresa mid-afternoon and arrested him later that night with no further incident.
After a time, our special response team got on scene and they were able to take Mr. Teresa into custody.
Teresa was taken to the Three Forks Regional Jail. His bond is currently set at $5 million, which Teresa's attorney argues should be lowered. Judge Gary Salyers said previous incidents and the timeline led to that amount.
Until he was apprehended, and the fact that he may or may not have an out-of-state record, all those reasons is why I set the bond so high.
Salyers said he will take the bond under advisement. The Wolfe County grand jury reportedly has 60 days to return an indictment. In Campton, Chandler Wilcox, WYMT Mountain News.
Police said Roger Pelfrey, who was shot twice in the incident, is recovering from his injuries.
We are tracking some mild and windy weather on this Wednesday evening. Those gusts up to 20, possibly 30 miles per hour in some areas, gusting to 30 in Ashland, also in Jonesville, Virginia, gusting to 28 over in London and 25 over in Jackson, also in Harlan and Hazard at this hour. And we stay breezy as we go into this evening as well. A live look from the WYMT studios, and not much happening back in the distance. More clouds this evening. That current temperature is where we should be for late March in the upper 50s, and some of us in the middle 60s at this hour, up to 67 for Harlan, also in Middlesboro, 65 in London, also Manchester, and 62 in Pikeville over in Jackson as well. Up on first alert pinpoint Doppler, maybe a couple of sprinkles close to Lake Cumberland, but for most we are dry, also partly sunny as we go into this evening. But we are tracking this weak cold front, and once this system passes, some cooler air is on the way as we go into tonight. And we are not done with the freezing weather just yet. Most of us back in the upper 20s to lower 30s as you wake up and walk out the door on Thursday. Also a little bit cooler tomorrow. Also one more dry day on the way tomorrow. Then rain chances return by Friday. Those details coming up in just a little bit. Steve?
Cameron, thank you. Tuesday, the Supreme Court kicked an argument over a Texas immigration law back to the courts. The decision allowed the law to immediately go into effect, but that reprieve lasted only a few hours. CBS's Natalie Brand has more from Washington.
Texas law enforcement for now cannot detain migrants suspected of entering the country illegally after an appeals court paused a new state law while it hears arguments on the matter today.
Texas has decided that we are at the epicenter of this crisis. We are on the front line. And we are going to do something about it.
Texas Senate Bill 4 would not only allow state authorities to make arrests, but it could allow state judges to issue deportation orders.
This is the first time, it seems to me, that a state has claimed that they have the right to remove illegal aliens.
Sheriff Martin Cuellar of Webb County, Texas, says he has concerns.
We're not immigration officers, and we have to get trained to make sure that we are following the rule of the law.
But Texas Governor Greg Abbott met with a group of sheriffs who praised the bill.
We will keep fighting regardless of what happens in the court, because we all have a collective responsibility, and that's to maintain the safety and security of our residents and our state and our sovereignty.
Attorney Kathleen Bush-Joseph with the Migration Policy Institute says she's worried about confusion on the ground and the legal precedent it could set.
Talk about the implications of this law if it were to go into effect.
For over a century, the Supreme Court has upheld the principle that the federal government sets immigration policy.
While the fight plays out in the courts, Mexico's government has already said it will not accept under any circumstances people deported by the state of Texas. Natalie Brand, CBS News, Washington.
President Biden, whom Republicans blame for the increase of migrants at the border, is campaigning in Arizona and Texas today. A new poll finds many voters do not like either party's presidential candidate for the upcoming election. A recently released Pew Research Center poll found about a quarter of the American public hold negative views of both Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Younger Americans are more likely than their older counterparts to fall into the double negative category. 37% of Americans who don't identify as either Republicans or Democrats don't like either candidate. Lawyers for former President Donald Trump are requesting a pause on at least 5 civil lawsuits linked to the January 6th riot. According to court filings, Trump's legal team says their trial strategy in Trump's criminal case could be compromised if the civil suits go forward. They're also calling for the judge to wait for the U.S. Supreme Court's decision on presidential immunity in the criminal case. President Biden and former President Obama are teaming up to organize supporters of the Affordable Care Act this weekend to mark its 14th anniversary. It comes as the Biden campaign looks to seize on former President Trump's repeated threats to repeal Obamacare if he is elected. Biden, Obama, and former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi will hold a national organizing call Saturday to mobilize supporters around protecting Obamacare from Trump's attacks. The auto industry is being driven toward EVs and plug-in hybrids, but the changes will not happen as quickly as originally planned. The Biden administration has finalized an important aspect of its climate agenda. It has to do with emissions from passenger cars and trucks. Last year, the EPA pushed for a rule calling for 2/3 of all vehicles sold in the U.S. to be electric by the end of the decade. But now the rule will be phased in more slowly. South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem is on Capitol Hill today testifying before members of the House Agriculture Committee. Her message: China is not our friend, and they certainly should not be our landlords. In a 2021 report by the Department of Agriculture, China owns roughly 384,000 acres of U.S. farmland. Between 2019 and 2020, Chinese ownership of U.S. land jumped 30%. Noem told the House Agricultural Committee it's a trend that needs to stop now.
In South Dakota, we worked for 2 years to make sure that we had a bill in place that would make sure we know who's buying our land and that it wasn't going to be from a country that hated us. China would never allow us to go to their country and buy land in their country.
The issue is a thorny one. According to the USDA, U.S. agricultural exports to China topped $35 billion in 2022. But as Noem says, the bigger picture needs to be thought of. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed a bill today making it illegal for homeless people to camp in public places there. The measure also sets up a program where local governments can set up special camping areas for homeless people. Anyone using those encampments is prohibited from using illegal drugs or alcohol. Regional entities are required to provide behavioral treatment service access if they want to set up an encampment. Coming up on Mountain News at 5:30, according to experts, there's been an uptick in text scams being delivered to unsuspecting consumers. Tips on how you can keep from having your personal information stolen.
Plus, we are mainly dry through Thursday, but showers are back to end the work week. Those details after this break.